Story 1. Ocarina of Time had me thinking I was actually saving the world with a controller that barely worked half the time. Story 2. Diablo 2. Nothing like staying up until 3 in the morning clicking skeletons into bone dust and selling your soul for slightly shinier boots. Peak childhood corruption. Story 3. The Bard's Tale on the old Commodore 64 got me addicted to both computer games and Dungeons and Dragons in one fell swoop. Story 4. When Morrowind came out, it was unbelievable. When The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time came out, it was unbelievable. Diablo 2, you guessed it, unbelievable. This continued every year ever since Super Mario Bros. 3 came out, in my memory. Story 5. Tetris, back on the old gray brick Game Boy. I must have boosted Duracell stock by a point or 3 with all the batteries I used playing that game back in the day. Story 6. I'm not much of a gamer. I play a game once in a blue moon, but I have very fond memories of playing the original Doom with my uncle. Story 7. My dad had Wolfenstein on his work laptop around 1990. He had to start the game using disk operating system. I remember something about C:\Wolfenstein\Goobers, if you know what I mean. Laugh out loud. Story 8. Super Mario Land on the Game Boy. I was playing my older cousin's copy when I was 3 or 4 and found the hidden elevators in the pyramid level that they did not know about. Story 9. I had my parents' Atari 2600 at home from birth and thought games were neat, but it wasn't until I played Super Mario Bros. At my mom's cannabis dealer's house that I realized I loved them. Story 10. Half-Life was the first time a game made me feel like I was the main character. The storytelling and pacing were so immersive that I did not even realize games could do that before. Story 11. Minecraft. I used to attend a coding class every week. When everyone was on a break eating snacks, I would dig my friend into the void so that when they returned, it always said, "You died." He would get me back too. Good times. Story 12. Maple Story. I am a game designer who recently got my first job in the industry. I definitely credit MapleStory with introducing me to gaming as a kid. Story 13. I remember my cousin bringing over his Sega Mega Drive with the first Sonic the Hedgehog, and it blew my mind. Story 14. Either Jurassic Park Operation Genesis or Alice Greenfingers. My monitor at the time was the typical chubby white cream one, like the chunky televisions of old. Story 15. Probably The Sims 3. It allowed me to live the life that I couldn't in real life and made me feel at home. Story 16. Contra on Nintendo Entertainment System. My uncle had it, and whenever we visited, I would sit in front of that game for hours. Later, as a teenager, Diablo and its multiplayer mode kept me playing for days. Story 17. Does a Turbo Tommy toy count? Story 18. Metal Gear Solid. Snake taking the elevator up with the title card is seared into my brain. Story 19. Leisure Suit Larry 1. I saw and tested it at a local technology convention when it was released in 1987. I had played simple arcade games, but a graphical adventure where you can explore a town and interact with objects and people? Sign me up. Story 20. I played every Sonic, Spyro, and Mario game I could get my hands on growing up, but Legend of Dragoon was the first game that I really remember getting into. It was my first role-playing game and really set the tone for the games I would choose as I grew older. Story 21. How about playing Risk Online via a bulletin board system? One move per day, staying up until midnight to dial up the bulletin board system to get the earliest move possible. Story 22. Halo Combat Evolved. Playing local area network 2 versus 2. In 2 adjacent bedrooms with cable through open windows connecting both Xbox consoles. Story 23. Might and Magic 6, 7, and 8. I still replay them about once a year. The Sims 1 was also my gateway into personal computer building by needing to upgrade random access memory to enjoy the expansions. Story 24. For me, it was Chrono Trigger on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The world felt alive. The music was unforgettable, and I could not stop exploring every secret. That is when I knew gaming was something special. Story 25. Kingdom Hearts. There are definitely contenders like Ratchet and Clank and Jak and Daxter, but Kingdom Hearts really touched my 10-year-old heart. It was the first game I played with more depth and different elements beyond the constant action of games like Jak and Daxter. It is definitely where my love for role-playing game elements came from. Story 26. Either Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, or Croc, Legend of the Gobos. These are the earliest games I can remember playing. Story 27. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Maybe not the greatest of all time, but one of the early games in my gaming journey. I remember getting the post-game blues after finishing it. Story 28. Tomb Raider 1 on the PlayStation. I had played a few games before then, but that changed everything. Story 29. Skyrim. I used to sit with a big, bulky game manual playing it at my sister's house whenever I could sneak down there as a kid. Story 30. Donkey Kong Country and Zombies Ate My Neighbors are games that not only mystified me as a child but, when returning to them years later, served as examples of how video game music, even in the 16-bit era, was a legitimate medium for serious composers. Story 31. Always enjoyed Nintendo Entertainment System / Super Nintendo Entertainment System, but it just felt like button mashing compared to when Nintendo 64 came out and games felt like more. Unreal Tournament really blew the doors off my imagination though. Still the best game ever. It still has better gameplay and more options and subcultures than most games today in my opinion. The variety of game modes, servers, and communities around each of them has yet to be surpassed in a popular game. I was deeply into 155-55 low gravity and stab capture. The flag, 155% game speed, 55% air control, low gravity and stab. Instant respawn with no dumb countdowns, constant action and absolute madness, heated competition. Normal speed felt very slow. Custom maps were abundant. There was a huge forum just for that one game mode. People still keep in touch more than 20 years after clan matches died out. Also, what happened to capture the flag in games? Games are better with singular team objectives. Story 32. I have been gaming since Pong was first introduced and have played on every system, including personal computers, owning most of them. The advancement of graphics and gameplay improves with every generation and always makes me excited to see what the next will bring. It has been an incredible ride. Story 33. I am old enough to remember when arcade games were at every place of business that involved drinking. I couldn't even see the screen, just pumping quarters in and mashing buttons. Story 34. Sid Meier's Pirates is the first game designed for long-haul gaming adventures, where you can build a career, not just advance a storyline. Story 35. It was certainly not the first game I ever played, but I am going to go with the original Super Mario Bros. I first played it in the arcade, and it made me want a Nintendo Entertainment System when I discovered that it was available on that platform. That was the first game where I felt a sense of accomplishment for beating it. Prior to that, I had only played games on the Atari 2600 or in the arcade, most of which were very short or games that continued until you ran out of lives and were playing for a high score. Story 36. Age of Empires 2. Kingdom Hearts. Pokemon. Don't get me wrong, I had so much fun playing Zelda and Mario, but these were even more enjoyable for me. Story 37. My first game was the original Donkey Kong, which unfortunately is lost to time, but I did not care for it much. What did get me into gaming was a stroke of luck that got my broke family a Super Nintendo that came with a Donkey Kong Country cartridge, and I really loved that game. I still have the same Super Nintendo Entertainment System 30 years later, and I occasionally hook it up and play some Donkey Kong. Story 38. Halo. Combat Evolved. Until then, I thought games were just for groups of people or for football games like Madden and National Football League Blitz. This was the first single-player game I ever played, and my 6-year-old self was blown away. Story 39. The Legend of Zelda. A Link to the Past. Donkey Kong Country 1. Killer Instinct. Growing up on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, I could not stand the Nintendo 64. Still cannot. The next system was a Dreamcast, then Xbox. I played the Super Nintendo Entertainment System for over 15 years before switching consoles. Story 40. I was already interested in games when I got a PlayStation 2, but what really engaged me was when I would go over to my brother's house and he had The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time on the TV. It was so enticing that I became obsessed with playing as young Link, just swinging my sword around. Story 41. There were a lot. Tekken, Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, and this 3D Pac-Man game that was actually very good. PlayStation 2 games were awesome. Story 42. Watching my older brothers play Super Metroid. One day they were all gone and they left the Nintendo on. What was I to do? Story 43. The original Half-Life is still a decent game today, but to understand how groundbreaking it was, you had to experience it when it was released in 1998 or in the early 2000s. I was lucky enough to have played it in my teens when it came out, and it was without a doubt a mind-blowing experience. The way the game immersed you into the gameplay was absolutely groundbreaking at the time. On top of that, the multiplayer mode was excellent. We would carry our cathode ray tube monitor everywhere just to play with friends at local area network parties. On the technical side, the game was very well built. The modification community kept reinventing the game. For reference, Counter-Strike was initially a modification for Half-Life multiplayer, and the rest is history. Story 44. The original Half-Life. I was a kid and used to sit on a stool in my dad's home office and watch him play. It sparked a love for both gaming and science. I treasure those memories. Story 45. I played a lot of games with my brother. Most of them were either cooperative beat-them-up or fighting games. I remember playing Spider-Man on the PlayStation 1, Tekken Tag Tournament, Spider-Man 3, and Star Wars. The Force Unleashed on the PlayStation 2. It was most likely one of these three. Story 46. Tetris. Nothing says childhood wonder like stacking blocks to techno music and spiraling into existential dread. Story 47. For real. Gaming did not hit me hard until Asheron's Call. I got addicted to simulators including MechWarrior and some flight simulators, followed by SimCity and Roller Coaster Tycoon. Then Command and Conquer, Tiberian Sun and Red Alert 2 got me into INI. Editing for unit specifications. Asheron's Call was finally a 3D interfaced, third-person online multiplayer collaborative experience in which I could also edit automation scripts with an injectable plugin framework called Decal. That was just exceptional. I loved it. I still love flight simulators. Story 48. It's hard for me to choose just one because I've been gaming since I was 4 years old. I turned 40 this year. However, I'll say Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The controls are a bit clunky by today's standards, but the level design, collectibles, secrets, soundtrack, and more still hold up very well. In my opinion, it's one of the best games ever made. A close runner-up for me is Final Fantasy VII. I actually remember being annoyed when my dad bought it for me as a birthday gift because I didn't know what it was. Apparently, the employee at Best Buy talked him into it. I'm glad he did. In addition to being an amazing game, it helped me through a lot of hardship and trauma. I still have my 3-disc PlayStation copy to this day. Story 49. Pokemon Ranger on the Nintendo DS actually. Call of Duty Black Ops 1 started my PlayStation 3 journey. Skyrim started my personal computer journey and will forever be my #1 game of all time. I have been sleeping with Skyrim atmospheres in the background for at least 11 years now to mute my tinnitus. Sometimes I tear up just starting the game. I do not know why, but the game feels like a warm blanket, and I can just lose myself in another world. Story 50. Civilization 2. I had played other games before it, but that was the game that captivated me deeply and made me a gamer. Story 51. The original Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt from the 1980s. I remember playing these games at a friend's house, and my mind was blown. Story 52. Medal of Honor. European Assault and the Legend of Zelda. Twilight Princess. Yes, I am aware it is not the best one. Story 53. Galactics, similar to Galaga, was the first personal computer game I had with color and sound effects. It was beautiful. Story 54. Age of Empires 2, Elder Scrolls 4, and Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Also, these are the reasons I learned this difficult language. Story 55. Let's age myself, shall we? It was a toss-up between the old arcade games Space Invaders, Asteroids, and Missile Command. Story 56. Crash Bandicoot 1 on the PlayStation 1. My love for video games and technology stems from watching my older sister boot up that game for the very first time. Story 57. I'm an original gamer. I started on the Atari 2600 with Pac-Man and Space Invaders. I loved that system and graduated to the Commodore 64 for more gaming. However, the game that made me fall in love with gaming was Street Fighter II in the arcade. Spent all my money on that machine. When they released it for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, it blew my mind. Arcade-style graphics on your TV. I played until I had blisters on my thumbs and then learned how to play with blisters. I was obsessed. Story 58. I believe my first game ever was Einhander for the PlayStation. I loved that game. In fact, I still do. I wish they made more games in the franchise. Story 59. Not exactly one, but I used to play hours of Super Mario All-Stars, the version that included Super Mario World, for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Story 60. Mario 64. I started playing before I could even read. Luckily, being able to read was not a requirement for the game. If I'm honest though, video games taught me to read. I'd always ask my mom, "What does this say?" At first, she would get annoyed, but after a while, it became a reading lesson every time. She would stop reading for me and start demanding I read it out loud with her. It really got me started on reading early. Story 61. Doom. Up until that point, I had only played arcade games. When I saw it at a computer show with John Carmack showing the demo and handing out two 1.44-inch floppy disks with the initial release for free, I went and bought a personal computer the next day. It turned me into a personal computer first-person shooter gamer for life. Story 62. Ascendancy was the first game where I really sat down and looked up 6 hours later, realizing I had missed multiple meals. I still have it, though it has to be run in DOSBox now. Story 63. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and Stunt Race FX. I think the furthest I ever got in Sonic the Hedgehog 2 as a child was Zone 5, but I remember Zones 1 and 2 clearly. I always wanted the blue truck from Stunt Race FX. Coincidentally, that is where I think I began liking physics in games, since the tires reacted to the hills and turns. Story 64. Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Of course, that was my first game ever when I got my first console, the Sega Genesis, at Christmas in 1992. Story 65. I worked in a small personal computer clone shop, and we created a local area network and played cooperative and head-to-head games every day. As long as we sold many computers, the owner did not really care what we did, so we played games at work. Story 66. Final Fantasy VII. The original version, not the recent remake, played on PC. Before then, I wasn't really a game player but more of a watcher of friends playing. I loved Final Fantasy VII when I played it. Story 67. Super Mario 64 and The Legend of Zelda. Ocarina of Time got things started, but Diablo 2 sealed the deal for life. Just one more Countess run. Story 68. Frogger on the Atari. I am not sure I was even in preschool yet, but I loved it. It was something I could actually compete with my older brothers at, and the first time I beat them. For the first time, even though I was much younger, I was able to win with my brain. It opened up a whole new world for me. Story 69. Minecraft, Rayman Legends, Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, and all of the Donkey Kong Country games. They were there early in my life, and I feel like they have left a lasting impact on how I view games as a whole. Story 70. Super Mario Bros. 2 and Super Mario Bros. 3 on the Nintendo Entertainment System were the first games that I played, and I really enjoyed them as a kid. I got to play them occasionally at daycare in the late 1980s and early 1990s. I begged my parents for a Nintendo, and they got us a Super Nintendo Entertainment System. I was really upset until I played Mega Man X on my cousin's Super Nintendo Entertainment System. That was when I became a gamer. Story 71. I would have to say Diablo and World of Warcraft. They also had the older Neverwinter Nights Dungeons and Dragons game. Story 72. Which one? I can't pick just one, but it would definitely be either Dragon Warrior 2 or Final Fantasy 3. Story 73. In my family, my parents got me a used Nintendo Entertainment System. We purchased Battle City. I had a lot of fun. We exchanged it for Super Mario Bros., which blew my mind, especially Super Mario Bros. 3. Those games made me love gaming. Now I play them online with my siblings from time to time. Story 74. Doom and Descent came out around the same time. I think I loved Descent more, although Doom had a longer history. Story 75. Played a lot of games early on that were frustrating, like Alex Kidd and Wonder Boy in Monster Land. But I fell in love with gaming when playing Wolfenstein 3D, which led to Doom and eventually Half-Life. Story 76. My first memories of gaming are Age of Empires and The Sims 1. I am 28 years old to put that into perspective when my gaming journey began. Oh, Grand Theft Auto 1 from my cousin. When my dad found out, he borrowed it from me and destroyed it in front of me. He did not know it was borrowed at that moment. I think I was 6 or 7 years old at that time. Story 77. Final Fantasy II on Super Nintendo Entertainment System. I was blown away that there was a world to explore and the characters had personality. Before that, I liked video games, but it was not a big part of my life. After that, there was no looking back. Story 78. I'm not a hardcore gamer, but I loved Chrono Trigger, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and Final Fantasy VII. I played them years after they were released, not on the original consoles, but it was still a magical experience. Story 79. This is a good question. The first game I can remember beating and completing 100% was The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening. Shortly after that, Donkey Kong 1994. And shortly after that, Pokemon Blue, beating and completing all 3 games. But I don't think I fell in love with gaming yet. I was still a 1990s kid, riding my bicycle, having water gun wars, exploring the neighborhood, and spending most of my free time outside. I would say Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for the PlayStation 1 is the game that started me spending more time inside during my free time than outside. I love that game, but still, it didn't make me love gaming as a whole yet. I think that came in high school with Grand Theft Auto, Vice City, and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets for the PlayStation 2. I got both of those games for Christmas, and those 2 games had me online, figuring out every little secret. I would beat each game and then immediately start a new run. That's when I knew I was a gamer. That's when I truly fell in love with video games. Story 80. The way my parents tell it, I was beating Super Mario Bros. Levels on the Nintendo Entertainment System before I could even walk. I have always loved gaming. Story 81. I played Pac-Man in the arcades as a kid, but the biggest hit for me was the original Super Mario Bros. On the Nintendo Entertainment System. Dad bought the one with the Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt combination when I was about 5. Story 82. Ocarina of Time was the first game I loved, and Warcraft 3 Online was the first game I was addicted to. I couldn't get enough of Defense of the Ancients on the Warcraft custom servers. Story 83. Watching people play arcade games at local arcades and pizza parlors. I thought they looked like so much fun. This was back in the early 1980s, of course. I remember watching people play Space Invaders, Centipede, and Pac-Man a lot. Story 84. I had played video games on the Nintendo Entertainment System in prior eras when I was around 4 or 5 years old. But the first video game that made me fall in love with games was Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The gameplay, the worlds, and the graphics for the time were all amazing. Story 85. Legend of Zelda. The Minish Cap was the first game I have any memory of, and I have essentially been playing ever since I had the ability to play that Game Boy Advance. Not only did it start my love of gaming, but also the start of a deep love and connection to the Zelda franchise as a whole. Story 86. The original Age of Empires. I saw an advertisement for it and just fell in love with the concept. I literally purchased my first computer from a local store just to play it. I loved that game. Story 87. Pac-Man, Centipede, and most Atari games were kind of a blur altogether, but that is what I had until my family got a Nintendo Entertainment System when I was 11. The real game changer was Dragon Warrior, though, my first role-playing game. It opened a new world of slow-paced gaming that has been my favorite ever since. Story 88. I've played games since the Atari days, but it was mostly a bored on a rainy day thing. Diablo 1 was the first game I can remember being obsessed with. I would think about it all day long, bring the manual to school, read it cover to cover, and try to draw the artwork in it. It is the first game I remember turning down plans with friends because I wanted to stay home and play Diablo instead. I love Diablo. Story 89. Smaf. Rescue in Gargamel's Castle for the ColecoVision. The Odyssey Squared had some fun games, like KC Munchkin, skiing, and bowling. But at about 3 years old, it didn't quite click. By the time I was 5 and we had the ColecoVision, it was all about this Smurfs game. Popeye was good too, but too hard for me. Story 90. In 2019, I bought a virtual reality headset and No Man's Sky. I fell in love with the medium right there. The virtual reality control scheme uses motion and positioning to replace many button presses. You select tools and build things by flipping through a wrist-mounted hologram that feels straight out of Star Trek. You control your ship by using one hand as a throttle and the other as a stick. Vehicles like landers, submarines, and even a mech suit are all controlled with in-game controls instead of just pushing forward on a stick and tapping a button. It was magical. Story 91. Watching my dad play Wolfenstein 3D and Doom 2 as a kid really sealed it. I would get so excited when he sat down to play. Story 92. Pokemon Blue on my Game Boy Pocket. Diablo 2 ruined me forever, but it was Pokemon Blue that first drew me in. Story 93. Mega Man X or Super Mario World are the earliest games I remember playing as a kid and was already hooked by then. Story 94. Chrono Trigger on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The battle system, the story, the characters and their relationships, and the music. A time travel role-playing game that has you affecting the game's whole history. Makes you fight a boss, then later lets you recruit that boss as a party member. And again, the music. I still listen to original and cover renditions of its soundtrack to this day. Story 95. The original Red Dead Redemption. I had enjoyed video games until I played that at a friend's house on release day with him. I have loved gaming since. Story 96. Street Fighter 2. That game blew me away as a kid. I remember accidentally performing a Hadouken and feeling like I unlocked a hidden feature. I would always go to my cousin's house to play Street Fighter against them until they broke their second controller, which always annoyed me. Story 97. For me, it was Pokemon Blue and Red on Game Boy. My older siblings had those and I eventually got Yellow. I remember not being able to read while playing them and asking what the buttons did. As a child in elementary school, I thought, if you guys can read, you can play more video games. Story 98. Ultimate Doom on PlayStation 1 port. The intro is stuck in my head. How Doom started as my favorite game series. Crash Bandicoot 3, Warped is the first game I played and loved, but Doom on PlayStation 1 made me live gaming. The PlayStation 1 port is the only good Doom port that is not the original PC version. Goddamn, I love Doom. Story 99. I had already loved games before this, but Jak 2 was the first game I played that made me care about the story and characters, which is now the main thing I look for in games. Story 100. Either Ape Escape or Pajama Sam. It was the first time I remember going, wow, how did they create something so engaging and cool? I think childhood me was baffled that games like these even existed. Well, here we are now. Story 101. Command and Conquer Tiberian Sun is likely the first game I played. While I was not necessarily able to articulate it at under 10 years old, I realized what we today call, and for many years have called, the atmosphere a game can have. Story 102. I'm a boomer, so pinball and other pre-video arcade games were around before Pong. I think Space War, Pong, Asteroids, Space Invaders, and all those early era games came next. I was lucky to live near arcades that grew from those pinball days. My dad worked at International Business Machines, so we got a home console from Sears pretty soon after they came out with it. We were slower to get the Atari 2600 after my dad died, but my friend got it, and I spent literally overnight at his house playing Space Invaders. His father discovered me there in the morning and kicked me out. Story 103. Probably Castlevania on the Nintendo Entertainment System in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Until then, computer games were just another childhood boredom breaker. Story 104. Super Mario Sunshine. I was too young to actually beat it, but Nintendo released it for the Nintendo Switch and I finally beat it a few years ago. Story 105. My first game I remember was Sonic on the Sega Genesis. I have loved him ever since. But the game that hooked me was Shining Force 2. I was young when I finally beat it, around 8 or 9 years old, and there was a twist ending that made my jaw drop. I realized I had just experienced an amazing story, and since then I have been hooked on stories in games. Story 106. Pokemon Gold and Silver made me fall in love with handheld gaming. I missed that era. It ended for me after the Game Boy Advance. I moved to World of Warcraft but quit gaming due to lower back pain. Story 107. Donkey Kong Country. At the time, the graphics were incredibly good. The gameplay was very fun as well. I used to read magazine articles about where to find certain secrets. I also had a VHS tape that explored some of the behind-the-scenes aspects of making the game. I have no idea why I had that. Story 108. Donkey Kong Country. I was 6 years old and was amazed by the graphics and colors. It kickstarted my love for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and video games. Story 109. The first time I saw a square-like figure on the Atari 2600 moving around with the controller, I fell in love with it. The game that really got me into gaming was the first Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Mega Drive. The games that made me fall in love with gaming again were Half-Life 2 and Super Mario Galaxy. Both are different from each other but very good. Story 110. Resident Evil 2. Hands down. I was 11 years old when I played it. That game got me into gaming. I would rent it again and again from Blockbuster and read the manual in the car on the way home. Such good memories. Story 111. If anyone recognizes this game, please let me know. It was a cartridge for the Nintendo DS with many games on it, and the one I played was Iron Man. You controlled the Silver Iron Man like the original one with fire coming out of the hands. It was a bird's eye view game. That's the game. Story 112. Battlezone, the old arcade cabinet where you look through a viewfinder to control a vector tank in three-dimensional. That really got me begging my mother for quarters. Story 113. The first Mario and Duck Hunt cartridge is funny because I do not like side-scrollers or shooters today. Story 114. Pac-Man on Atari. There were others, but I loved playing that so much and even got Mrs. Pac-Man and Pac-Man Jr. Story 115. Kirby's Epic Yarn. The entire experience felt like a work of art, from the unique visuals to the lovely music. I really enjoyed the game mechanics as well. Yes, it is easy, but an easy, cozy experience was exactly what I needed. Story 116. Pokemon White was my first game, and I have loved gaming ever since. Although Crash Bandicoot on the PlayStation 2 is what started my love for platformers. Story 117. Mega Man 2 on the original Nintendo Entertainment System. I am sure I had played a couple of games before that, but I was either too young to form memories of them or they just did not grab my attention like Mega Man did. Story 118. Age of Empires 2. Age of Conquerors. I played that for the first time at age 6. I love micromanaging tasks, watching numbers increase, and optimizing my economy. That game inspired me to pursue the sciences and mathematics because it taught me that I love numbers. I am now an applied mathematician working on a Doctor of Philosophy degree. Story 119. KC Munchkin on my Odyssey 2. Not only did that get me into console gaming, it also inspired me to create my own games because it had an editable map. Story 120. Original Contra on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Played it repeatedly until I could finish it without using the Konami code. Story 121. Combat on Atari, specifically Invisible Tank Mode. Quake 1 on PC multiplayer. I remember late at night another gamer knew I was using the arrow keys and chatted with me through the chat on how to use WASD. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.